Chances are you come into contact with many different chemicals every day. And with every chemical, there are risks. When you're working daily with hazardous chemicals, those risks escalate considerably. The potential for injuries, whether to you, the people around you, or the environment, can be especially significant. And that potential gets even greater if you don't know and understand the basic nature of those chemicals and how to safely work with them. To help prevent accidents and injuries, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, developed the Hazard Communication Standard, commonly referred to as HAZCOM, or the Right to Know law. This regulation gives you the right to know which chemicals are being used in your workplace and the possible dangers you are being exposed to. You also have the right to know how to protect yourself when using hazardous chemicals. As part of the Hazard Communication Standard, your employer is required to provide you with the knowledge and training necessary for you to do your job safely. In 2012, OSHA aligned its Hazard Communication Standard with the United Nations globally harmonized system for classifying and labeling chemicals. While OSHA maintained the framework of its traditional HAZCOM standard, it adopted the GHS hazard definitions and safety data sheet and labeling formats. GHS mandates a consistency in format and information for every hazardous chemical and is a worldwide standard for the countries that choose to use them. Prior to GHS, there was an inconsistency of information that often brought about confusion and uncertainty for employers and employees alike. Sometimes even the very definition of what constituted a hazardous chemical was inconsistent, resulting in even greater confusion. So, what makes a chemical hazardous? A hazardous chemical is any chemical which is classified as a physical hazard or a health hazard, a simple asphyxiant, combustible dust, pyrophoric gas, or hazard not otherwise classified. Physical hazards are those chemicals which can cause a fire, explosion, or some other violent reaction when they come in contact with air, water, or other chemicals. Chemicals that threaten people's health are called health hazards. By entering the body in one of three ways, inhalation, skin contact, or ingestion, these chemicals can cause both short-term or acute health problems and long-term or chronic health problems. OSHA considers a health hazard to be any chemical which is toxic, is corrosive to the skin or eyes, is a respiratory sensitizer that may cause cancer, birth defects, or reproductive issues, which attack specific organs in the body, or which are harmful or deadly when inhaled. You've probably figured out that working with chemicals without a proper understanding of them can be quite dangerous. So, the HAZCOM standard mandates that your employer complies with 5 regulatory requirements. 1. Create an inventory of all hazardous chemicals at the workplace. 2. Ensure each chemical has a GHS-style safety data sheet, or SDS, that is easily accessible to all employees who work with that chemical. 3. Ensure each chemical container is properly labeled with a GHS-style approved label or an OSHA-approved workplace label. 4. Create and implement an employee HAZCOM training program. And 5. Develop a written program that describes how the HAZCOM program has been implemented. You have the right to know about each of these 5 requirements, because if they aren't followed, you aren't protected. Hazard communication begins at the chemical manufacturing plant. Chemists classify and categorize each chemical based on its hazards. From this information, the chemical's GHS-style safety data sheet and label are created. These safety data sheets and labels must be passed along to each company and person who handles that chemical, from supplier to transporter to the final end user, helping to create the master list for the chemical inventory.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
All right. Here's your SDS.
Great.
You got about 36 cases back there.
Sounds good.
All right, take it easy.
You too.
Let me just get your number down real quick. Okay, I get something to write with. What was it? 4, 1, 3, 2. What did? Talk to you soon. Bye.
Creating a chemical inventory is the first step to ensuring a safe work environment. When a chemical arrives at your workplace, the hazard information is passed along with it so it can be added to your company's chemical inventory, creating a list of vital information. OSHA requires that each company keep a complete and up-to-date inventory of all its hazardous chemicals. This list not only identifies all the hazardous chemicals on site, it is used to make sure each chemical is accounted for, is properly labeled, and has an up-to-date SDS. This includes chemicals used off-site as well. Safety data sheets are one of the most important tools to help ensure your safety. And one of the biggest advantages to having a standardized format is you'll know exactly where to look when you need to find information quickly. The SDS explains everything you need to know to safely work with a specific chemical, from what it looks and smells like, to its potential hazards, to what to do in the event of an accident. To be compliant with GHS, all safety data sheets must have the GHS specified 16-section format and include certain types of information in each section. The standard format better ensures that all employers and employees understand the chemical, its hazards, and the precautions users must take to remain safe. Your understanding of the information provided on a safety data sheet can mean the difference between being safe and being seriously or even fatally injured. Let's take a look at a GHS-style safety data sheet and the information it contains for a hypothetical chemical we'll call Solvent X, a chemical mixture used to flush equipment. In Section 1, Products and Company Identification, we see the official name of the chemical as well as other names it goes by. This section may also contain recommended uses of the chemical and restrictions on its use, the supplier's details, including name, address and phone number, and an emergency phone number. Under Section 2, Hazards Identification, we see the hazards that are associated with this chemical, along with the information that's required to be on the chemical's label, including the pictograms, signal word, hazard statement, and precautionary statement. When looking at Section 3, Composition Information on Ingredients, we see what ingredients have been used to create the chemical and which of those are known to be hazardous. Section 4, First Aid Measures, describes the treatment methods you should use to help yourself or someone else who's been exposed to the chemical. Section 5, Firefighting Measures, describes the combustibility of the chemical, any possible secondary results if there is a fire, and how to put out a fire if this chemical is involved. Section 6, Accidental Release Measures, describes cleanup procedures in the event of a spill. Under Section 7, Handling and Storage, we see the safe ways to work with and store the chemical. Section 8, Exposure Controls, Personal Protection, shows the minimum amount of time a person could be exposed to the chemical before being potentially affected, and how to protect yourself through proper clothing and handling techniques. Section 9, Physical and Chemical Properties, outlines the chemical's characteristics, such as its normal appearance, odor, solubility, melting and freezing points, flash point, evaporation rate, flammability, vapor pressure, and density. Section 10, Stability and Reactivity, describes how stable the chemical is, as well as the conditions that create instability. The chemical's toxicity, or the degree to which it is poisonous, and other potential health hazards are found in Section 11, Toxicological Information. This section lists both acute and chronic health conditions that can result from overexposure to the chemical. Section 12, Ecological Information, describes how the chemical interacts with the environment, including how long it will last, how it spreads, and any other pertinent information. Section 13, Disposal Considerations, explains how the chemical should be discarded. Section 14, Transport Information, instructs on the safe and unsafe ways of moving the chemical. Section 15, Regulatory Information, describes the safety, health, and environmental laws specific to the chemical. And Section 16, Other Information, includes any additional details that are important to disclose regarding the chemical as well as the date the SDS was prepared. While this is a lot of information, it's all clearly identified on the safety data sheet for one simple reason: to keep you, your coworkers, and the environment safe. By utilizing the standardized form for all hazardous chemicals, whether you work with that chemical every day or you just happen to be in the area when disaster strikes, you'll be able to determine exactly what to do quickly and effectively, because you'll know exactly what to look for and where to look for it on the SDS. Think about it. When there's an emergency, the last thing you want to do is spend time frantically searching through a safety data sheet to find the information you need. Once you're familiar with the sequencing of information used on one SDS, you'll be familiar with the sequencing of information used on all SDSs. But being able to read a safety data sheet is only half the solution. You must also know where to find SDSs in your workplace. OSHA does not dictate a specific place for companies to keep their safety data sheets, but it does say they must be in a location that's easily accessible by all employees. In some companies, SDSs are stored on a computer. In still other companies, hard copies of SDSs are kept on site in 3-ring binders. Whatever the method used, your employer is required to make sure you can get the critical SDS information you need quickly, clearly, and easily. If you have trouble locating or understanding the SDS for a chemical, talk to your supervisor right away. And don't use the chemical until you have the information you need. Safety data sheets truly are a wealth of information. It's vitally important that you know where to find them for every chemical you work with, and take the time to read and understand each one thoroughly. If a chemical emergency occurs, that should not be the first time you're reading the SDS. The safety data sheet is not your only source for information on the hazardous chemicals you work with. Each hazardous chemical container must also be labeled with both the chemical name and other vital quick reference information. The HAZCOM standard requires that there be 6 GHS compliant label elements: product identifier or ingredient disclosure, signal word, hazard statement, pictograms, precautionary statement, and supplier identification. Let's take a closer look at these elements. The product identifier or ingredient disclosure describes just that: the name of the chemical or a brand name, or the hazardous ingredients the chemical contains, or both. The signal word, if required, discloses the relative level of hazard severity. Danger is used for more severe hazards, and warning is used for less severe hazards. The hazard statement describes the type, nature, and degree of the hazards associated with the chemical. The pictogram is always a black symbol shown on a white background and surrounded by a red diamond-shaped border. These images are used to depict all the physical, health, or environmental hazards caused by a particular chemical. All of the hazards that apply to that specific chemical will be shown. In all, there are 9 pictogram symbols: oxidizers, flammables, explosives, acute toxicity, corrosives, gases under pressure, health hazards, environmental hazards, and health, irritant, or other harmful effects. The precautionary statement describes actions that should be taken to prevent or minimize the negative effects that could result from exposure to the chemical or from its improper storage or handling. And the supplier identification includes the name and contact information of the supplier, manufacturer, or importer of the product. Your employer can also choose to relabel the chemicals in your workplace with an OSHA-approved label in order to make sure all the chemicals in your company's inventory are labeled consistently and in a way that you and your coworkers can easily understand. Relabeling might happen when a large quantity of a chemical is broken down into smaller ones and then distributed to different work areas within your company. However, if you ever find a container without a label or one where the label is unreadable, you need to notify your supervisor immediately so a new label can be applied. The one exception to this is if you transfer a chemical from a larger, labeled container to a smaller, more portable one, and use the chemical in that smaller container during your immediate work shift. But the only person who is allowed to use the smaller container is you, the person who did the transfer. And while on the topic of exceptions, what about chemicals that don't come neatly bundled in bags, bottles, or drums? How are you warned of the potential risks of a chemical that is just created, like the fumes that are created as a result of welding? In these instances, your employer is required to put up signs or posters warning of the potential danger. This is necessary so you and others can protect yourselves from harm before you enter the area, like putting on the appropriate personal protective equipment or breathing apparatus. So while SDSs are a complete resource for the chemicals you work with, labels are a quick and immediate reference. You should always review a container's label before using the chemical to ensure that it is in fact the chemical you believe it to be. You never know when a container that you think you are familiar with gets changed. The label will tell you for sure.
So continuing our talks about the new SDS formats and procedures, just a couple quick things to know. It's important to know throughout the building where sheets are located, and also just what to do in the event of a spill. So obviously never drink or use tobacco when using this product.
While it's essential to have the safety data sheets and labels at your disposal when working with hazardous chemicals, what brings it all together is the training you receive from your employer. OSHA requires that each person who works with hazardous chemicals be trained on the Hazard Communication Standard. This includes being trained on hazardous chemical container labeling, safety data sheets, and the chemical inventory. Additionally, your employer must provide you with specialized training for the specific chemicals you use in your job. Knowledge is the best defense against the hazards you face in your job. By actively participating in these opportunities, you'll be ready for almost any threat that comes your way. The fifth requirement of the HazCom standard, which is the written program, pertains more to your employer than to you directly. However, you still have rights related to it. The purpose of the written program is to document, in detail, your employer's plans for communicating the hazards and risks involved with using the chemicals in your workplace. And you do have the right to review this written program whenever you want, so you can see what your employer is doing to keep you and your coworkers knowledgeable and safe regarding the chemicals in your workplace. However, the ultimate responsibility for your safety is not in the hands of your employer. You must take ownership of your safety. And here are a few of the actions you can take. Remove all jewelry to avoid skin reactions. Use face and eye protection if the chemical could be splashed in your face. Be especially careful if you wear contacts, because chemical splashes or vapors can easily become trapped under your lenses. When you finish handling a chemical, wash your hands thoroughly and make sure safety gear is clean and properly stored. Don't eat, drink, or smoke near any hazardous chemicals. Make sure you know where the nearest eye wash station or emergency shower is located. Dispose of hazardous chemicals as directed by your employer. Never mix chemical wastes unless you know that it's safe to do so. And know your company's policy for dealing with spills or leaks. Finally, know how your employer wants you to respond if an incident involving a hazardous chemical happens near you or a coworker. Ultimately, in an emergency, it is up to you. You need to know what will make the situation worse and what will make the situation better. This means reading, understanding, and following the guidelines of the chemical SDSs and labels you work with, so you know how to handle any situation that comes along. Knowledge is essential when working with hazardous chemicals. It's your safety that's at stake. By learning as much as you can about hazard communication, the globally harmonized system, and the chemicals you work with, you can be better assured that every day will be a safe one for you and the people you work with.